Hello, everyone. Welcome. I hope you had an amazing weekend. It's great to see you back in the NSE today. Welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 785th New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the huge pleasure and privilege today of being your MC for a conversation with LaToya Ruby Frazier and Jessica Holmes. We're also thrilled to welcome poet Madison McCartha here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter, and here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we are speaking from. And now to introduce today's guest and host. LaToya Ruby Frazier was born in 1982 in Braddock, Pennsylvania. Her practice spans a range of media, including photography, video, performance, installation art, and books, and centers on the nexus of social justice, cultural change, and commentary on the American experience. Frazier's work is committed to the legacy of 1930s social documentary work and 1960s and 70s conceptual photography that address urgent social and political issues of everyday life. Frazier's work has been featured in solo exhibitions worldwide. Writer, editor, and critic Jessica Holmes' writing features regularly in Bomb, Hyperallergic, and the Brooklyn Rail, where she edits art scene and art tonic sections. Previously, she worked as editor-in-chief of the arts publication Degree Critical. For nearly 2 decades, she worked for the Calder Foundation, including 6 years as its deputy director. We are so grateful and honored to have LaToya and Jess here with us this afternoon, and I'm so excited to pass it over to you, Jess, to get started.
Great. Thank you, Eleanor, for that lovely introduction. And LaToya, thanks so much for taking the time to be here today. I'm really interested in hearing more about your show. As you probably all know, LaToya currently has an exhibition up at Gladstone Gallery, and its full title is More Than Conquerors, a monument for community health workers of Baltimore, Maryland. LaToya, before we get more into talking about your work, I thought maybe you could give for the audience's understanding a little background information on just what a community health worker is and how they operate in a region.
Yeah, sure, Jessica. Hi to everybody out there that is able to join us this afternoon. It's my pleasure to do a program with Brooklyn Rail and spend an hour or so with all of you. So thank you so much for your time, energy, and effort to be here to discuss the show. In short, the easiest way, a community health worker, also called a CHW, is the liaison between the communities they serve, and in most cases where they also reside, with the healthcare corporations that also reside in their city or their community. So they're the conduit, the go-between. They are the person that is able to get on the ground. Often in the exhibition, in the testimonies, you hear them refer to themselves as the foot soldiers of the healthcare industry. So if you can all imagine, in terms of a totem pole, a community health worker would be seen at the bottom, then your case manager, social worker, nurse, doctor, and so forth. So they really understand the urgent need to get their clients, patients, and in often cases their neighbor, access to equal health care. Often they will go and make checks, knocking on people's doors, calling patients who aren't making it to their appointments. They get to the bottom of why that might be the case, in which in these testimonies you see, often these things are all built around social, economic, and political reasons that folks aren't making it to their doctor's appointment, or to the simple fact that they keep returning to the emergency room as if it is the doctor's office, when indeed it is not. So community health workers were vitally important throughout the COVID-19 pandemic because they participated in getting the initial rollout out into their communities. And they also specifically helped an institution like Johns Hopkins get its numbers down in the emergency room. Many of you may or may not know, there was a move to start to penalize doctors and hospitals because of the overusage of their emergency room. So this is why CHWs become incredibly important to saving healthcare giants like Johns Hopkins millions of dollars, so they stop getting the fees, the fines, and the penalties, and they make sure that the clients and the patients get access to equal and adequate health care.
And on a just on a very base level, how did you become interested in documenting and chronicling the lives of community health workers?
Yeah, well, from the very beginning of my work as a teenager, the work was always centered on environmental racism, environmental justice, and access to healthcare. In 2010, my community where I'm from in Braddock, Pennsylvania, the UPMC, which stands for University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, decided to close our community hospital. They claimed that it was underutilized and losing a lot of money, which if anyone has ever been to Braddock or have been to industrial heartland towns in America, we know specifically in Braddock that it is still very much a steel mill town. And it is also constantly being cited for a lot of environmental violations. You could imagine under the 4 years of Trump, I mean, the emissions of pollution and toxicity was it was just a grave circumstance that people were facing in the midst of COVID-19. So those of us who are born and raised from there and still reside there and still have family there, we know that we are constantly in our emergency rooms. We are constantly in the hospital and in doctor's appointments. So you see that in the Notion of Family for over 14 years, literally documenting, trying to survive the type of pollution and toxicity there. Also trying to bring a visual record, a human document of what spatial and structural racism looks like in a town like mine. But then, of course, speaking back to it and taking action once they tore down our hospital. It left me no choice, especially because my grandmother died in Braddock Hospital right before it was announced on the 11 o'clock news that it would be closed. So not only was it political, it was personal. And so immediately all the elders of my community pulled me under their wings and they taught me what civil disobedience is. They taught me what it means to do grassroots activism. They taught me what it means to go outside and protest. And so you see that in the Notion of Family. You see that in my series Campaign for Braddock Hospital. It becomes vitally crucial if we want to fight back against these types of human rights violations to not only document it, but also resist it. And participate. So it was very easy for me to transition into the Baltimore CHWs because in 2015, I was brought to Baltimore to do a conversation. It was a collaboration between the Contemporary and the Baltimore School of the Arts, where they created this panel and this discussion series, and they put me in conversation with Dr. Lisa Cooper, who has created the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Equity, or the Health Equity Center. And in 2015, they put us together, and I want to give a shout out because it was Dina Hagag and Alyssa Moorhead-Blunt that brought us. And Alyssa asked us on the panel, like, how could a doctor, scientist, and an artist collaborate to make useful art, that would be useful to our society? So that was a question posed in 2015. And here we are today in 2021 and 2022, where Dr. Cooper and I came together and responded through a compelling series.
And so maybe you can tell us a little bit about the monument itself as we scroll through the photos, but also for audience members who maybe haven't had a chance to see it yet or are far away. How is it exactly composed, and how did the idea unify for you as you were working on it?
So I initially took a call with Dr. Cooper, and when Dr. Cooper found out what was happening, even with my own personal situation around getting access to COVID-19 vaccine, she decided to put me in touch with her mentees, Dr. Chidima Ibe and Dr. Anika Hines. So the four of us got on a call together, and through discussing Dr. Cooper's book, Why Are Health Disparities Everyone's Problem? I made sure I read that book and listened to her talk to me about that book. And then through my conversations with Dr. Chidima Ibe, who for over 20 years has made CHWs the focal point of her research and her practice, and through Dr. Anika Hines, who implements a method called photo voice in her research and work, which is where doctors give cameras to the clients and they go out into their communities and they make photographs, which then the doctors and the clients create exhibitions and they put them on view so they can bring policymakers in to impact change. It became very clear to me that it needed to be this two-sided photographic installation. Now, to add on to it, to make it even a larger core group of us that came together, Dr. Chidima Ibe decided it would be really important to bring in Tiffany Scott, who is the first certified CHW of Maryland. She is also the co-founder of the Maryland CHW Association. She was also a very integral and important part of creating the first policy around getting CHW certified in 2018, where they went to Annapolis, worked with Republican governors to get this passed. And so CHWs as a certification is already seen as a part of Obamacare. And it became important for me to learn how to see the city of Baltimore and understand how the CHWs navigate East Baltimore versus West Baltimore. What are all the various different neighborhoods? In order for me to understand that, Tiffany took me on a 3-hour tour all through Baltimore so that I could learn how to see it through her eyes, through her perspective, through her family history, as well as start to set up a series of questions and ways that I could approach the CHWs to then find ways to make portraits with them. Once we brought in Tiffany, then Dr. Cooper felt very strongly that Reverend Hickman should also be a part of it. Reverend Hickman runs an organization, Reverend Deborah Hickman runs an organization called STAR, and it stands for Sisters Together and Reaching. She has run that organization over 20 years. Dr. Hickman worked with Dr. Fauci in the HIV and AIDS epidemic, as well as now the COVID-19. She was the first person, the first religious leader to create a safe space for Black men and women who were facing HIV and AIDS when they were being shunned by their own communities. She also was the one who had the first groups of community health workers that were working with Hopkins and working with Dr. Fauci to do the initial COVID-19 vaccination rollout. So imagine this is a very robust team, right? You've got an artist, 3 doctors, 1 faith leader, and then someone who is incredible like Tiffany Scott, who also is a CHW, but she also refers to herself as the CHW. And so all of these women are incredible advocates as well as activists. And so it made sense for all of us to team up. And then once I spoke with all of them, that's when they created another Zoom conversation, because this is in the midst of the pandemic. So they created another Zoom conversation. And at this point, I flew into Baltimore. I was staying at the Revival Hotel near the monument there at the Revival Hotel. And that's when we were able to get some of the CHWs to come forward. So Tiffany called all of them, saw who was interested, many came forward. And on that initial call, when I proposed to them the idea of making these portraits of them and that I was going to exhibit it at the Carnegie International with the hopes of then generating enough credibility and value so that I could find a way to get it to Baltimore permanently, the fact that they responded in such an emotional way told me enough. So if you can imagine, I'm sitting on my computer in this hotel, I'm looking out my window, on my left is this statue of, a slaveholder and someone important to US history like George Washington. I couldn't stop thinking about people like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington because you're confronted by those histories, and I would see it every day from the hotel. So in the middle of hearing them talk about who they are, their work, and how they feel like they're invisible, I looked out the window and then I looked back at the screen with all their faces, and I said to them, you know what? How about I make some presidential portraits of you? And they all started smiling, and I knew what it meant to them in their response, because again, they saw themselves as an invisible workforce that wasn't being appreciated, and yet they're the ones risking their lives in the streets trying to get people vaccinated. And they're not used to someone coming along caring about their labor and their existence and their family's history in their hometown. So it was deeply moving. As well as troubling, but I was up for the task because there's nothing more exciting than adding value to someone's life and bringing visibility to them. So then I said to the doctors, you know, I am like an artistic surgeon. I'm separate from the institution. I do not work for Hopkins, but here's what I can do. I will not only make the portraits, but I'll also come and interview you. And then I said to them, imagine an installation with ivy poles. So I conceived of this workers' monument, and being a little girl living next to Andrew Carnegie's first steel mill, his first library, constantly seeing statues of him, it was natural for me to want to make workers' monuments in the 21st century. I think, you know, why shouldn't we in America have workers' monuments? If we can give so much praise to, you know, industrial capitalists and politicians and celebrities, I don't think there's any harm in celebrating and praising workers, especially ones that led the charge of saving countless Americans' lives during this horrific pandemic. So what I decided to do was work with Tiffany. She created this Google Doc. I would sit at my laptop every day in the hotel, keep hitting the refresh button, and I would wait for these CHWs' names to pop up. So they would fill out their name, their number, their email, the date they wanted me to meet them, and where. And I didn't ask questions. I just loaded up all my equipment, my recorders, my cameras, my films, my lights. And then I would basically dispatch myself all across Baltimore to find them at their locations. So the first session was me interviewing them for 3 hours. And then the second session, based on some of the things that their heart gravitated towards in the interview, they would come up with the location. And of course, I wanted them to present themselves in the way that they felt comfortable and dignified and how they wanted to be seen. So we would do a second date where I then would go out with my camera, meet them at another location, and then we would do the photo shoot. And while that was happening, I also was conceiving of the actual monument, which is the photographic installation you see. And so it becomes 18 IV pole stands. So yes, it is real medical equipment that you see that is social distance. So because we've come so used to this social distance rule, that's how you as a viewer get to engage with the work. So you walk around and you realize this is social distance. This is actual medical equipment modified to be double-sided to hold 4 vertical frames. On the reverse side, once you make it past the front row, what you realize is there are smaller images and text. Those are done by anonymous CHWs who participated in Dr. Chittima, who's right here on the screen, on Dr. eBay's study called ALEC for short, which stands for a lived experience of CHWs. So they have to remain anonymous. And what I did was I'd had 4 different cohorts where I met with Dr. eBay and the groups that came forward. I picked their cameras. So I got them a nice digital camera from B&H Photo, had them shipped out. I then taught them how to use it. And we're doing all this again virtually because it's the pandemic. So I walked them through a presentation, how to use it, how to do the settings. And then they went out across Baltimore and I taught them about how landscapes, because remember, they have to remain anonymous so they can't photograph themselves. So I taught them the idea of a concept of a landscape as a self-portrait. And so that's what you start to see on the reverse side. And that's why the monument is double-sided. It's the pictures they decided to choose with the text about why they took it. And what you start to see consistently through those on the reverse side is that they're talking about the crisis around social determinants of health. So access to grocery stores, fresh food, being able to live in adequate, healthy housing that isn't being pushed back and receding and being stepped on by gentrification and redevelopment, access to a better education, as well as things around healthcare. And so it becomes clear what a social determinant of health looks like. And that's why it's important that it's there. And then it also does one thing that I think is important for anyone who's listening right now that is an artist, a photographer, a contemporary artist that cares about real world social issues. It's important for us to start thinking about how to democratize the arts. And so imagine I'm showing photographs by CHWs who I just taught how to make photographs, who view themselves as beginner photographers that are already exhibiting their own work in the Carnegie International and now on view at the Gladstone Gallery. So like adding artistic value to workers' everyday lives as well. And then the other thing that I'll point out about what you see in the installation is, and again, anyone who's listening to this who kind of is double dutching between who or what can they do, how far can they reach? I think it is very important. It's incumbent upon all of us right now to get out of our comfort zones. It's no longer acceptable to say, I can't photograph someone because I'm not the same race or ethnicity. We are beyond that in this country, and we can see that in the way that the politics are going. We have to be able to step up and advocate for people who don't look like us, people who may not speak the same language, even people we may not even disagree with socially or politically. And we need to do it because the most important thing is humanity. And that's what I see in all of my work for over 20 years. People engage with me because I'm acknowledging their humanity and adding value. And I think it's important. You have to get out of your comfort zone. You can't say, I'm going to stay in my lane because I'm white or I'm Black or I'm a woman or I'm female. This is silly. And so I intentionally, me and Dr. Ibe intentionally made sure that we worked with a group that only spoke Spanish. And so what you see on the reverse side, the bulk of the reverse side is all written in Spanish first and then translated in English second. And I can't tell you how important that is. And if you look at all of my work from the notion of family through now, it has always been a diverse working class population. It was always there. And so whoever needs to hear this today, I'm encouraging you to please, we need camaraderie, unity. We need people who want to do grassroots organizing that is multiracial, multi-intergenerational. It has to happen, and it has to happen now. And the art world needs to make room for work like this. And so this monument is also trying to usher that in so that the next generation of artists can feel comfortable making this kind of work and seeing it in a Carnegie International or in a blue chip gallery. It's just really important to do that.
LaToya, that's wonderful. And you've just brought up so many new questions for me. One thing that did strike me as I was walking through the exhibition recently was the backsides of the portraits, and those which are mainly landscapes, as you mentioned.
Can we go back to the installation so people can see that one to the reverse side? The third one down, the third slide down. There you go.
There you go. You know, seeing the landscapes and then combined with the testimony of the health workers, you know, most of them are either born and raised in Baltimore or have strong family roots in Baltimore. You get the sense that Baltimore as a community is really shifting, and that there's different dynamics in neighborhoods and depending on where you are in the city. How does that you know, specific dynamic of the city play into the work that you eventually produced?
I mean, that's what it's really all about. In order for the images and the work to come into existence, it all relies and hinges deeply on how to navigate a city when there are demarcation lines, when there is like severe segregation. For those of you who are interested, the homework assignment. So the first book you need to get is Dr. Lisa Cooper's book, Why Are Health Disparities Everyone's Problem? please buy this book and encourage your family and everyone else to get this book. The second book that you should look for is a book that came out that deals with, again, what my work is trying to make visible and tangible is spatial and structural racism. So there's a book that talks about, and then the title, because I bought it at the beginning when I arrived, it talks about how Baltimore is really a butterfly shape. So it's like a butterfly effect in terms of how it is being segregated and redeveloped. And I experienced it as well, just trying to like find a hotel or a place to stay. You go online, like you look at Verba or some of these other apps, and then you start to realize, well, because of the way I look, I'm not going to be able to get this apartment, and nor do I feel comfortable being in this hotel. I was shocked. I was shocked at how crystal clear the segregation is. So the butterfly effect is like, if you come up basically where the monument is, where I was staying at the top of the Revival Hotel, that's the center. And then from left to right, you see that it's all redeveloped around downtown Baltimore, so near all the stadiums, what we usually see as tourists when we come. But when you start to take a closer look and you think about economic upward mobility, social upward mobility, this is all going to be at the affluent population. And that begins to recede in a certain shape that looks like a butterfly as you go from east to west. And then you see there's like this, again, demarcation line around the parameters of that shape that become predominantly Black. And it pushes out until, of course, it's the suburbs and you're no longer in the city of Baltimore. So that was something that Dr. eBay talked to me about right away. And then, of course, I purchased that book. So all of the work really does help someone who's never been to the city or doesn't know about this workforce navigating a city like this. It renders it crystal clear. I was just at CMU speaking, and there were students who were already using my photographs from the Notion of Family to the CHW work to talk about place and city and architecture. And I was completely blown away that they saw the images as a way to learn how to navigate and pinpoint certain intersections. And I guess I shouldn't be so surprised because it is how I work. So like I'll create a list. I look at longitude, latitude points. I charter helicopters and I fly above a city so that I'm able to get aerial shots to then come back down on the ground to give them to people so they understand, like, this is how your community is being redeveloped. This is how you're being pushed out. And to make something like that accessible to everyday people who will never be able to charter a helicopter and they don't understand how their body, their home, and their family are geologically situated within these types of invisible forces, I think is invaluable and important. So that starts to become clear as you continue to walk through and look at the reverse side, because they speak very strongly about the communities and neighborhoods, and they speak very strongly about how policies are shaping East and West Baltimore.
And another thing that you sort of touched on a little while ago, but maybe you can talk about a bit more, is this work was made pretty much at the height of the pandemic, which must have shaded how you approached it. How did COVID play into all of this as you were working? I mean, you get such a strong, like, I almost had like a sense of a flashback walking through the show with the very consciously socially distanced IV poles and the IV poles themselves, you know. There's sort of like this suffuse feeling of solemnity, and I just wonder if that has to do, how that has to do with COVID.
Well, I'll start from a personal place. Dr. Cooper, when we met in 2015, at that time, she told me and the public that she saw the Notion of Family. She had the book and she felt that it was a form of medical visual art. 3 years later, I was in a situation, a crisis, where my mother was on life support at UPMC Presbyterian in Pittsburgh. And my mother it was already being told to me when I arrived that she was already dead, she wasn't going to survive, you know, basically to give up. there would be no chance. And I told them, I'm not going to do that. You don't know who you have in your bed. And actually, I'm going to sit here and wait until she comes back into her body. So she was on the IV, right, getting her hydration and food, and eventually had to do dialysis. And I realized that none of the social workers or case managers were being supportive. It was the complete opposite. It was almost like they had wished I went away. And I knew I was in trouble because my mother's primary care physician refused to come. And I, again, was trying to advocate for her as best as possible. So when I realized we were being discriminated against, I decided to pick up the phone and call Dr. Cooper. And Dr. Cooper said, I have a mentee in UPMC. Her name is Dr. Issa Davis. Some of you who were at my first solo show at Gavin Brown Enterprise in Harlem in 2018, I did a program with Dr. Issa Davis, and my mother was also there, and we addressed what happened. And Dr. Issa Davis did not know me or my mother. She came over to the hospital to visit and to look at my mother. She was not her primary care physician at the time. And that spoke volumes to me, because Dr. Issa Davis is a Black woman. The woman who was my mother's primary care physician was South Asian, and the doctors who were doing all the rounds were white. And they treated me more like an adversary, or if I was invisible. But the bottom line is this: I knew the patient bill of rights because Dr. Davis and Dr. Cooper taught me about that, and I went and looked it up. Every day around 4 o'clock or 5 p.m. in the evening, Dr. Davis and Dr. Cooper would help me go over the notes, over what those doctors were putting in the computers, over the type of language they were using. So I would write down everything they said, because I didn't understand the language of doctors. So I wrote everything down, took notes, and then they would look every evening and help me understand what the language is, what it means, what the medication is, what the dosage is. So I studied and studied and studied. And I share all of that to say, at that point, like, I'm thinking, who has the time to sit here with a loved one? And anytime something negative happens to me, I like to turn it into a question, because I was going to advocate for her no matter what, right? I'm her daughter. That is my mother. You only get one. So I realized, though, I'm on break from teaching at the School of the Art Institute. How many other Americans have the opportunity to sit with a loved one's body for 3 weeks? None of them. And I didn't realize that being the liaison between these doctors and my mother and trying to guard her body, basically I was playing the role of a CHW, but I didn't know that because I didn't know it existed. And so I say to all of you, what would you do? How would you feel if you weren't able to sit at your loved one's bedside while they're on life support to make sure that they were getting equal healthcare, equal access to healthcare? So that spoke to me, and that taught me something. And ultimately, Dr. Issa Davis became my mother's primary care physician. Like, it was no question. And again, it also teaches me about what we think of these larger healthcare institutions, right? It's very easy to talk about Henrietta Lacks and dismiss Hopkins and make them an enemy because they work at Hopkins. But in reality, like every institution and like every level of society, there are always people working inside to do what is right. And so I wasn't going to question that because it became very personal. So they interceded to save my mother's life. She wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Dr. Cooper and Dr. Davis. And so that made my bond with Dr. Cooper even deeper. Then I broke quarantine. The only time I left, I stayed home for 2 years in my basement in Chicago, working on The Last Cruise and Flynn, His Family in 3 acts. It was a great time to get those 2 books done. But I broke quarantine because of Breonna Taylor, and I went to Louisville because I was commissioned to photograph her family, and in particular, her partner, Kenneth Walker, at the time. And it was through that experience of creating these procession portraits celebrating her life, right? How do you photograph someone who's no longer here? And I was able to do it by following her routes to work in the community and her family around Louisville, leading up to where everyone had been protesting in the city, and then meeting up with Kenneth Walker to photograph him holding the engagement ring and the shoes that they would have given their first child. She wanted to be a nurse, but she's not here because she was killed in her home a little after midnight. right? She wanted to be a nurse. So again, healthcare is arriving in my work yet again, and I'm thinking about it. My mother was a nurse. My niece is currently going to school to be a nurse. And I think about how Black women have always been at the center of supplying care and mutual aid and loving on our communities from the very beginning. We've always been there. We're just not visible. We're not honored for that work that we do, which is endless work. The other reason it's important that I made the portraits where they chose to be photographed is because in hindsight, we're in 2023. This happened 21 and 22. These workers have already been released from their positions. So had I not documented and interviewed them, there is no evidence that they did all of this work. And the fact that I'm at very specific locations that people know also, again, help you as a viewer kind of pinpoint or drop a pin on a map to understand, well, where were they when they were looking for tranquility and peace? Where were they when they were looking for a respite? And then the other thing that caused me to spring into action with this, the one that really got me going, was when I have lupus, so I have an autoimmune disorder. And when our government and mayors and politicians were talking about how this should be rolled out, there were different phases. And so I was scheduled as a phase 1B plus. Chicago is massive. It's a large population. So I, like everyone else, signed up. I fit the category in the description of phase 1B plus with an autoimmune disorder. I was taking hydroxychloroquine, which also became a shortage because Donald Trump told everyone that if you take hydroxychloroquine, you can beat the virus, and that's not true. Millions of people rely on hydroxychloroquine, also known as Plaquenil for short, as a life-saving drug because they have an autoimmune disorder. And we were the ones that were kind of being left behind because people weren't sure how the vaccine was going to interact if you had an autoimmune disorder. So now there's a shortage. I'm rationing my pills, and I'm thinking, how many other people can't afford, like I can, to walk up to my pharmacy and say, I don't care what the insurance company said. They told me when I got there before lockdown, you can't have it because the president needs it, so we can't refill your prescription. The insurance company won't do it. And I said, oh, really? Well, I have cash. Give me my damn prescription. And I walked home and I was thinking, how many other people couldn't afford to pay for their medication in cash? And I looked online and I saw an outcry of people saying they can't get their medication, the hydroxychloroquine. That horrified me. And then, of course, when it was finally my turn to show up in a northern suburb where I was scheduled, I was given a QR code, I was given instructions to go to a northern suburb in Chicago to receive my first dose. I get there, I'm sitting down, they're about to administer the dose, and suddenly the manager of that location walks up, prevents the person from administering the vaccine, pulls my paperwork, asks me to come aside and says, you made this up. So basically I was detained and accused of making up my QR code to come to that location to receive the vaccination. This is a part of being a Black woman in America every day. I mean, it's just like part of everyday life, and it shouldn't be. And instead of being deterred, I decided, once I survived the humiliation of what he had did to me in front of everyone at the site, to then go home, reschedule another one. But then I decided to call Dr. Cooper because she had been looking at the same thing. We both saw the same narrative discrepancy, which is people were saying that African Americans didn't want the vaccination. It was not true, right? If someone like me was being turned away, imagine how many other people were. And so I was asking myself this question, like, well, who is the person that gets someone access to the vaccination if they are being turned away, or if they are afraid to go to these sites? Because when you arrive, it's law enforcement and it's the United States military. And then what I saw too was like the difference in the racial divide of who was at what site, either guarding it or administrating the vaccine. So that was what caused me to, ask that question, who, yet again. And so between my mom's life support, me not receiving the vaccination or being denied, they all led to the same answer: the community health workers. It's the CHW that is able to deal with both. And that is why people's lives were being saved at such a higher level during this period while they were out there working with Hopkins and working around their community. So that kind of what, Jessica, all of that is what set the backdrop for me as an artist to kind of think through conceptually how I could harness all of that experience, right? All of that trauma, but also all of the pride and resilience in the face of so much discrimination to then make something just beautiful that serves a higher purpose, that also makes us reimagine and rethink, well, what is the purpose of a monument in the 21st century? And I think it's so important to look beyond glorifying one man or one colonizer or one capitalist. Like, imagine a world where we're able to honor everyday people, not for what they look like and what they did financially, but for the love and care they provide to our neighborhoods and our cities and our people. And that's what this monument does. I'm not saying make a monument of each CHW's body. I photographed them that way, but in its totality, it's talking about the love and the care and the grace in which they were able to save so many people's lives.
I think one of the things that it does beautifully too is allow them such a nice space for their voices to be heard. I mean, and I encourage anybody that goes to see the show to really take the time to read some of the testimonies that accompany each portrait. LaToya, maybe you can talk a little bit about those testimonies and some of the narrative threads that arise in the stories of these individual health workers' lives.
Yeah, so what I was thinking about when interviewing them was who their family is, what part of Baltimore they're from, how many generations of their families do they go back, right? That's Erica Hamlet standing with her mother and her 2 kids and her grandson in front of the Cherry Hill Holmes where she grew up. That is her building right behind her, right? So I drove and met her out there to get that portrait of her. What made them get involved with healthcare? Why are they happy to be CHWs, right? Where did they get their empathy and their compassion from? So thinking about all of those questions, I was able to really help you as a viewer to, see how universal some of these things are around all of our lives and all of our families. These are very relatable testimonies. And so they're 3 hours. They could have kept going past the 3 hours. At first, they're like, I'm not going to talk to you for 3 hours. Who has 3 hours? And then it's like, they're still going. And I'm like, we're at time. But I then took the 3 hours, transcribed them. That totaled about a little over 100 pages. Then for over a year, I was able to sit with all of that text and start to comb through and edit it down. So the second pass got down to 10 pages. And then the next final edit was anywhere between 3,000 to 3,300 words. I worked with one editor that I trusted, because I think if you are interviewing people and you're sitting with the text, you have to have one more person with a clean palette and a fresh set of eyes to come in and work with you. And I was fortunate to have someone who was already part of the Gladstone team that was able to work with me as a brilliant writer and editor that was respectful of the cadence, the nuance, the ways that they speak. I was a photo editor at Newsweek in 2006. I've been working on both sides as a photographer, photo editor for the bulk of since 2006 through now. And so I know what happens when you do a piece and you've got to then negotiate for text versus image to the real estate on the spread, or you have to fight to convince these editors to let someone's voice really shine through. More often than not, it never happens. What we end up receiving when we go to these major media outlets are something that is trivialized and sanitized. And I kind of got fed up with that. Many of you may remember the piece I did, the last cruise that ran in New York Times May Money issue as the cover story. The only reason you see those voices first person, because I am the one who interviewed them, and that is my text. You see it because I had the audacity to fight for it. Like, you're going to run these people's voices first person and let them say what they need to say. So once I went through that and realized, like, you're exerting a lot of energy and then they're going to end up cutting it down to a couple of hundred words, that's why I took this approach. So imagine this. There's probably many of you on this call that have been interviewed. How annoying is it, right? No matter what level you're at, where you read an article about yourself and, like, you know, they barely fact checked it, or they took it out of context, or they didn't quite hear you. So what I wanted to do was switch hats and work as a writer and an editor for the CHWs. So what you see in these testimonies is every single word that they wanted there. So they had the final edit, the final approval. So nothing is printed that they didn't want printed, which also, again, speaks to the intensity of our trust and our bond, and how I was showing up for them, and the fact that they spoke so candidly, in such a raw, honest way about their lives. And it was important to do that. And so if you can, as a viewer, it's easy to see the piece and be like, this is too long, it needs to be a book. It's not. It doesn't need to be a book. That's the point. When you look at it, you see a diptych. You see a framed portrait on the left, but you also see framed text on the right. As an artist, I'm saying to you, it's a visual cue. What they have to say is equally important. I believe, as an artist, that there's nothing more powerful than walking into a museum or a gallery than seeing the people who are depicted in the painting or the photograph standing right next to it, speaking for themselves. Like, there's a power in being able to do that. And of course, it offsets the hierarchy in these places as well, which is very important. And the last thing I'll say about the text, it's not meant for you to see the whole monument in one day. This is a piece where you need to come back to it. I was able to do some research and look at how we retain information. Is it better that we read a text or that we listen to it in audio? It continues to be debated. But what I realized is that what I learned is that we do retain more detailed information when we read it. So at this moment, the only way to read the text is if you come to the installation. But I edited it between 3,000 and 3,300 words, because no matter if you read slow or fast, it is going to equal roughly 15 to 20 minutes, which equals the length of a doctor's appointment.
Oh, interesting.
Every interview, they talk about how their clients are so afraid of advocating for themselves in their doctor's appointments. So you, as the viewer, I want you to come back. You know, maybe you only do the first row on a visit. You have to return like we return to our doctor appointments, however often you go, because some of you probably don't go as much as you should, but we're supposed to go a certain amount of times per year. And so that is the way it's conceived and timed and edited. Also, what they're pouring their hearts out saying, I can't reduce it to the way that we ran it at like 600 words or 900 words in the New York Times for the other work. Like, it just isn't right. So it's important to think about it that way. And it also helps you reestablish, like, yeah, why aren't we seeing more stories like this? And of course, it's the argument I've been arguing from the very beginning, and which made me as a young teenager make my own story about Braddock, is that our mass media is controlled by 6 conglomerates in this country. They're all men. I think 5 are white, 1 is Asian, and they pretty much serve the tastemakers and the elite. So our media and news in this country is geared towards politicians and corporations and whoever is in power. So you won't get to see or read stories like this. And I think what I do is I run parallel to mass media, right? So because we have a 24-hour news cycle and we're used to that, things go quicker. So I feel like I come in as someone who is like an ally that runs parallel, that can create and build these larger sustained stories that allow Americans to keep coming back to.
And to bring it back to the healthcare workers, when I was reading the stories, you mentioned sort of at the beginning that the community health workers, you met the bottom of the totem pole. So obviously they're usually underpaid. They're most likely overworked. And many of them bring up a lot of the same things in their stories. They don't have access to great healthcare or nutritional food or good housing, affordable housing. What are some things that you learned, and maybe you could share with us about how health workers can be supported, and what kind of things can we do as citizens to ensure that their lives are also valued and they're paid fairly and housed properly, and et cetera.
Yeah. So this work has a mission, and it is not only a mission that is a statement and makes you aware, but it is being used to shape policy right now. The monument itself demands in its presence and in its title that community health workers be seen as a profession. So that's one. They need to be seen as a profession. Two, they need to be seen as a profession with full-time employee. What we don't know until you are exposed to the monument here and you read the narratives is this troubling fact that, and again, they refer to themselves as the foot soldiers for these institutions. They were out there every day exposing themselves to COVID, losing loved ones, getting COVID themselves, trying to roll out this vaccination. But because they live off of grant money, so think about this, these healthcare institutions receive grant money from the government. And then that grant money is used to pay a certain amount of CHWs. But because they are not seen as a profession or full-time employees, that therefore means they're not getting access to the full health benefits they deserve, not to mention an opportunity to put money towards a retirement. So again, I'll repeat that. These CHWs were on the front lines of COVID-19, rolling out the vaccination, exposing themselves, losing loved ones like the rest of us, and they were never seen as full-time employees. Therefore, they did not receive the full health benefits they deserved. They also did not receive the type of mental support that they needed when they were going through that. And you got to remember, it wasn't simply the invisible virus that was killing our community at that time. It was also, we were watching the Black Lives Matter protest and organizing happening because we were also being killed. Again, Breonna Taylor was murdered in the bedroom of her home after midnight. We have to stomach and understand that in this country, we're not even safe in our homes when we're sleeping in bed at night. So you also have that type of pressure and reality happening on top of the invisible virus, on top of systemic and institutional racism that create disparities in our healthcare systems, that create these issues around social determinants of health. So they are internalized and carrying all of this load, but they're not seen as full-time employees, have no access to full health benefits, were not receiving any of the mental health that they deserved. And so the monument really does command, and it says that they deserve to be seen as a profession with full-time, seen as full-time employees so they can be adequately paid so they can receive their health benefits. That is where we're at. And at the moment, Tiffany and Dr. Ebay and Dr. Cooper are continuing to lead the charge to get policy change around this. This is specifically why I made the monument. Even the doctors told me that when they do research and work that hinges on social issues, they're funded less. So this is happening even within these Ivy League institutions, being funded less because it is predicated on social issues. Like, this is not fair. But thank God Dr. Dr. Cooper created the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Equity, which is how I was able to work with them to make this piece and remain a separate agent from that institution. So what I need for all of you to do, wherever you reside, whatever city you live in, first of all, when you go to your next doctor's appointments, ask those doctors, have you ever heard of a CHW? Is there such a liaison? If they say no, tell them who they are and why. As a matter of fact, you can take in Latish Walker's testimony. That's a homework assignment. Just read each testimony. I made sure to interview them in ways to give you the answers to the questions I'm raising as an artist. So there is no stone unturned in these interviews. Not only does it teach you about their labor and what they do and what you should be advocating for, they also give you clues as to things you could do to save your own life and to take care of your own health. If we look at Kendra Lindsay, she talks about Irish sea moss, black seed oil, all the things that she does to help get the A1C down and help get diabetes down. She's someone who wakes up at 6 in the morning. This is Kendra with her family in the conservatory in Druid Hill Park, where she chose to be photographed with her family. She's a police officer as well, a community police officer, a CHW on the board of multiple organizations, as well as she runs her company called Kinlan Fit, where she helps people in her community take care of their health and get their weight down and get in shape. I mean, these are phenomenal men and women that are completely overlooked, unsung heroes, but are literally saving people's lives and changing the culture and the access to healthcare in their communities. So in addition to talking to your doctors, you could also, if you ever see a CHW, acknowledge them, talk to them, thank them for their service. I mean, these are people serving our community. Most of all, what you can do is write to your mayor. You can write to your senator, your governor, demand that we have community health workers, demand that they be seen as part of our health industry. We desperately need it. If we're not going to get universal health care for all, the least this country could do is acknowledge and give us CHWs. They could at least do that. So make sure that you do that because they are a part of Obamacare. I think while you have a Democrat in office, maybe you should be calling all the way to Biden's administration so that this is at the top of mind for them. Dr. Cooper was talking to President Biden when we first started making the work. So I know she does talk to him. I know he is aware, and I believe that he told Dr. Cooper how important CHWs are, and he knows it's an important issue. So write to President Biden, write to Barack Obama, talk to Michelle Obama. She was the one who was doing all the fitness and health stuff as first lady. So like they know about these issues. It's just that we need more policy force, right, for change. The doctors are already doing the work every day, and the monument stands here to document it and show it and prove it. And one of the other things that doctors and scientists often say is like, they want other ways to reach a broader audience. So this was also my response to making the doctor's research more accessible to a general public so more people know about their research. And I think it's important to read. I want to read a little excerpt of what Tiffany Scott said, because this also, Jessica, comes full circle with your question. Is that okay for me to read an excerpt from one?
By all means.
Okay. Let's see where I want to start at. I'm going to read this one page because it details it beautifully. I mean, Tiffany's incredible. The Maryland CHW Association's mission is to be a statewide organization run by and for CHWs. We create a safe space for CHWs to share their trials and triumphs, to network, to get trainings, and to be inspired by the work that is being completed by other CHWs. So really, we want CHW networks in every state, right? So that's another thing that you can all do. We looked at the Social Work Association and the Nurses Association. We saw what they were able to do and thought, why can't we do that? Why can't we have something to empower our profession and to make our voices heard? At the same time, Maryland legislators were writing a bill for the CHW profession. We had the state government participating in our meetings, and we were sharing our thoughts and ideas. It it was really a good merger. So again, reaching across the aisle is possible for some folks. We had policymakers and advocates from the state who believed in the CHW profession and who were honored to advocate for the sustainability and recognition that we deserve. We were able to blend all our thoughts and ideas to put a bill together. The original bill was in 2017, and the policymakers invited the CHWs to testify. We had 175 people ready to testify, but they only let 3 testify due to the number of those who wanted to testify at that time. We were hopeful, but a little discouraged. The bill didn't pass. We went back to the core group and added some additional stakeholders. Again, we blended our thoughts and ideas. In 2018, the bill passed. That's how CHW certification began in Maryland. Some states still don't recognize CHW certification. And the other thing I'll say about the certification, when these other healthcare institutions found out about CHW certification and that they were going to grandfather some in, which meant that those CHWs could demand better pay, they fired them. So you will read 3 testimonies in particular from Donnie Missouri and Vita Moore, where they talk about being released because they were one of those original CHW certified. So again, like my work tends to be on the trail of is, 21st century union busting as well, but you see how they resisted and their stories are incredible. These stories are triumphant. They do not stop at when a wrong is done. In every instance, each testimony, they end up having the victory. So it doesn't stop at being defeated. It actually shows how they overcome a tremendous amount of evil. I'll continue on with another paragraph. This is Tiffany Scott. I am now moving toward policy. I've been really thinking about getting a master's degree in public health. I have my platform and my voice is being heard. So how else can I be effective? I want to be the ladder so that the next CHW can climb further. I want to use myself, my platform, and my position to break the glass ceiling. When I started, I was just a CHW. The organization that I work for didn't have CHW training. We weren't involved in policy, and no one was advocating for us. So I'm excited for every opportunity I get to speak. The pandemic was stressful. A lot of CHWs lost their jobs. Many were struggling financially. Whenever there was a resource that I knew they would benefit from, I would tell them. It's sad when no one really wants to help us, considering the work we do and how we help our community. Many of the CHWs don't receive fringe benefits. They're not in a place where they're flourishing financially. On paper, it may look like they're making a living wage, but what they're bringing home doesn't cover all their expenses. My heart goes out to those CHWs, and I try to do whatever I can to help. I've gone into my freezer and given away food because I want them to be able to at least feed their families. It is despicable that some of the bigger hospitals and organizations in the state of Maryland only pay CHWs $13 to $15 an hour for the work that they do. CHWs don't ever sleep. Our minds are always working. We're always thinking about how we can help our clients, and that's something that you can't turn off. Still, CHWs are seen as the bottom of the barrel when it comes to chain of command and what's important within an organization. Even though we're a great return on investment, they get rid of us in a financial crisis. CHWs get the job done. We give organizations so much and get so little in return. Some CHWs will forever be working from grants. The organization will never put them into an annual budget. They'll never get paid for a personal day or a vacation. We're overwhelmed and overworked. So what happens to our mental health? This is my fight to ensure that we are part of the budget and structure of organizations so CHWs don't have to wait on a federal or state grant to be paid. We help institutions save so much money. They pay other people, but can't pay us. It's just hard to get people to understand our importance. Maybe if all the CHWs went on strike, then organizations would see our importance and realize that they need to pay us. But we're so dedicated and loyal to our clients, we can't afford to lose the momentum that we have created with them. That's the organization's chokehold on us. They know we won't stop serving the community. Some of the bigger institutions hire and terminate CHWs whenever they want. They want us to come in, clean house, get the patients in order, then terminate us. They want to give us pennies on the dollar to work twice as hard while the institution is making money that folds. Some organizations treat CHWs like crap, but we keep their grants funded. I wish I could say today will be the day that policymakers will see the light and understand that CHWs deserve to be salaried employees with full health care and leave benefits. We were written into Obamacare. Policymakers are trying. Meanwhile, some CHWs are applying for the same government benefits that they are referring their clients. Currently, I work with several CHW policy groups. I'm in one with Dr. Chidima Ibe on reimbursing CHWs through Medicare and Medicaid. That's an ongoing fight because a lot of clients are Medicare and Medicaid recipients. I met Chidima years ago at a conference. She was talking and I thought, she's cool. I want to get to know her. I went up and talked to her. Then she came to the CHW meeting and it was my opportunity. So you can see, like, Tiffany understands that one of the answers is simply dealing with the insurance companies. You know, they should be able to cover their salary. But that's just one page, 4 pages of her talking about her life and why she loves people. I mean, Tiffany loves everyone. And she says, like, why wouldn't I love you? You're human, right? I love all humans. And I think like that's at the heart of all of this. And it's also at the heart of my own practice as an artist.
LaToya, I can't think of a more apt way to end our conversation than on these direct testimonial words from one of the healthcare workers. And I really want to thank you for rethinking what a monument can be and recreating one that really honors people who are on the front lines and working so dedicated to their community. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jessica, for your thoughtful questions, and so much gratitude to you, LaToya, for your generosity and for everything you shared. It's been absolutely incredible. Just cannot thank you enough. And please, everyone, go see the show at Gladstone. We do have a bunch of questions in the chat, so I'm going to start off with a question that I will read on behalf of Pat. Pat's first question is, has the show been seen in Baltimore?
Thank you, Pat. Actually, I have a praise report that I can't say in full detail, but it has always been the mission from the beginning to get this work to Baltimore. And I think, what's beautiful about being an artist is how our labor runs parallel to theirs, the invisibility of artist labor and what we do. The fact that we can make something from nothing, and then we have to learn how to navigate it so that it can get to that final destination. From the very moment, this was one of those pieces where it's like, I've been working this way since I did the work with the coal miners in Belgium, where it is for them, by them, made with them, about them, and it needs to remain where they are so that it impacts the cultural change it needs between the institution and the people who reside in the city. And so I knew that it needed to go there, but in order to do it, the route it had to take was the platform at the Carnegie International. Because as an artist, that's my platform, and that's what gives it the visibility and the credibility and the urgency. So once the momentum built up there, especially because they gave it the Carnegie Prize, which is touching for me because it's a poetic justice, because I am born and raised from Pittsburgh. And yet I had never been invited to a Carnegie International. So even to have the solidarity of a curator like Rob recognize that and want to rectify that situation by putting me in there, it's what allowed me to make a monument that spoke to workers in Pittsburgh. It was a graceful way to confront UPMC for their policies and how they treated me and my family and my community, to allow people to really get educated and learn from it. And then, of course, because it's our oldest museum show of its kind since the late 1800s by Mr. Carnegie himself, which is the town I'm from that he created, it's kind of poetic as well as bittersweet for me personally. So to come full circle and to have an invisible workforce garner that type of recognition and award, again, sets the credibility and the value. From there, it needed to come to Gladstone, which creates a moment like this, where I'm able to have this conversation with all of you to talk about the great lengths that we all went. Also, because it suddenly inspires, again, other people and other artists and other collectors and other curators and other institutions. There are beautiful ways of making work that testifies to an urgent crisis in our country without pitting people against each other, and making us all feel like we can contribute and be a part of it and create the solution together. And so once it got to Gladstone, and just so you all know, in all of my bodies of work, from the Borinage in Belgium to the auto workers in Lordstown, every time one of my monuments is on view in a museum or a gallery, all of those workers come with their families. So recently at Gladstone worked with me, and this is also a testament to galleries that support their artists, that get it, that truly put the artist first and will help them with their vision, and they won't question them about it. Like, this is an extension of my work. It doesn't stop when the work is done and on view. It's actually all of the community organizing that happens around it and all of the opportunities it brings to get people from different classes and socioeconomic brackets in the same room. So for the Gladstone opening, we actually did a round trip on a nice bus to bring all the CHWs and doctors from Baltimore the day of the opening. When they arrived before everyone else started to come, so that we could have a private moment to ourselves. And I gave them a speech and talked to them about the purpose and what was about to unfold. And then we had dinner with them where they were able to get up and speak from the heart themselves. And I think there's nothing more greater than an artist when your work starts to speak back for you, right? So if I was on trial, there they were to tell the truth about what the encounter was and what the work means to them. And it's also about relinquishing my own agency and power over the work, right? As artists, we have to learn how to make the work and step back. Like, you've done it. If you were honest with it, you've done the work. And so I'm detailing all of this to say it was an incredible moment where a patron came forward and was so deeply moved by the work. And finally, it hit them like art can change the world. As cliche as it is, it can. It just does it in these one-to-one type of ways, which is what I've learned. There's no overarching revolution for me in my work. It's how I'm treating people every day. How you show up for your neighbor and a stranger every day is what changes the world. It's not going to change from Congress. It's got to be us. So because they were so moved, because the CHWs and the doctors testified over dinner, they decided to help me do what I wanted to do, which was make sure that that piece goes to the Baltimore Museum of Art. So we're in the process of doing all the paperwork for that, but it has already, someone has already come forward where they are absolutely going to make sure that it is given to the Baltimore Museum of the Art so that it remains permanently. And that means that I'm able to have come full circle with a mission and a purpose and to do something meaningful. And that means that Hopkins, which is not that far from the Baltimore Museum of the Art, as well as all of those workers who live not far from it, now have a place where they can feel honored and they can go to. And so that celebration should be being announced at some point in the summer, maybe, and then we'll wait to see when they announce when they'll put it on view. But you will see it end up being a permanent work at the Baltimore Museum of Art.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, LaToya, and thank you, Pat. That was a great question. And we did get a lot of amazing questions, and unfortunately, we won't have time for all of them. So just apologies in advance, and thank you to everyone for your questions. But our next question will be from GE and also from Rainer, who had a similar question but had to step away. So GE, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very, very much. And thank you for everything you've brought to us today. Can you talk about the potency of your process of photo voice, especially in the way it addresses issues non-verbally to overcome these social and cultural barriers to communications?
Yes, this would be a great question for Dr. Cooper and Dr. eBay. So, what the doctors do with, because this is a real IRB approved study. So the fact that it's even in a contemporary work of art is incredible. And again, speaks volumes to the trust and the type of relationship building we all did. The studies do lead to them actually doing that, writing the articles that come out. So there are articles doctors and scientists publish all the time. So, and maybe I could send some of these links after the talk. There are actual studies and research articles written that prove it. And right now they're gearing up for doing some presentations this summer as well, advocating yet again, and then building back on the traction that was happening before the pandemic. We can now pick back up. So what I see the doctors and someone like Tiffany Scott doing are preparing for these conferences and publishing more papers. So all of them, even Reverend Hickman, there are articles, scientific articles, health articles that are written that explain the entire process, how to do the training, how it impacted these institutions, that really do create a case for why we actually need to employ them. So I'll make sure to send a link so that you can all access some of those articles, but that's the purpose. And so by having them in there, it also creates, again, another opportunity to compel people to care, to help people understand, oh, I can do something about this in my community. So it'll be important to, again, in your own city and state, to talk to your legislators and policymakers and elected officials about the fact that this work still needs to be done, and it already has the traction. So we need you to keep your word, right? We're electing them to deal with our crisis in healthcare. So I'll be sure to get you those articles.
Thank you for the homework. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question, GE. Our next question will be from Zoe Leonard, and Chloe will ask on her behalf.
Wow, thank you so much for this incredible dialogue. I am going to ask this question from Zoe Leonard. Thank you, LaToya, for this great talk and for your larger body of work. So many of the issues you raise here remind me of AIDS activist work of the late 1980s and 1990s, before there were any life-saving medications available, especially in terms of discrimination, invisibility, and the links between social and economic power and access to healthcare. ACT UP had working groups that not only focused on protesting against government discrimination, but also worked directly with needle exchange, reaching out to imprisoned people, and more. Do you feel any connection to the work done by activist organizations like ACT UP, and do you see your work as part of an attempt to build coalition between different groups of people or organizations? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Zoe, and I appreciate you being here. Huge fan of your work as well. Yes, without a doubt, this would not have come into existence if it wasn't for the organizing that we do. So you've got to, again, try to imagine all of us working remotely, right? Meeting on Zoom or creating these Google Docs, and then of course, creating a grassroots movement around the city to get me out there around all of them. So that in and of itself is grassroots coalition building 101 that really brought the work into a visual, visible, tangible existence. All of my work heavily relies on it. I had to do it in Flint, right? With the atmospheric water generator. the local elected officials would not support bringing this 25,000-pound atmospheric water generator to what they call the most violent neighborhood or intersection in America. So it took organizing and grassroots activism between me, Amber and Shay, right? Two incredible Black mothers who are poets and songwriters and activists, a retired Army, a retired Ranger, a retired Ranger who built the atmospheric water generator, a scientist who helped prove that it was better standards than the World Health Organization in terms of the quality of water it created, and his own team that are also people who are veterans. So we organized without the help of elected officials because they were the opposition at that time, and were able to find through the collective we built, the family who owned the land. So when we got it from Fort Sam, Houston, right, off of a military base all the way to Flint, we could drop it on the ground where we needed to, where they couldn't interfere or take it away from us. So like in all of my work, it always shows up, right? And I pointed out earlier, even with Campaign for Braddock Hospital, Save Our Community Hospital, called SOC for short, are the elders of Braddock who spoke out against those Levi ads, who called out the mayor, who's now the senator, who wasn't respectful in doing what he was attempting to do in his process, right? He stepped on them to get to where he is. It wasn't that he was an ally that helped. This is about people amassing power. So in every body of work, I am resisting Republicans, Democrats, all types of people who become tools of corporations that are so greedy that they will remove your democracy, take away your vote, and strip you of your human rights, right? So for me, it is so important that the work is done in this type of grassroots way, in this type of intergenerational way, and also across all race and ethnicities. And so that is what was able to help me galvanize to work with the CHWs. There was a moment where the numbers kind of stopped, and it was that people had heard that I was there interviewing and photographing them, and their employers got scared. And so this is touching on something else for me, Zoe, that I think once we do all this collective action and unity and solidarity, what I noticed from trying to interview them, and some of the employers were not, shelter for the homeless, where Gregory Rogers is standing in front of it. It's healthcare for the homeless, healthcare for the homeless, where Greg Rogers is standing. They embraced that I was there, so much so they took me through the whole building, gave me a tour. I met the people in charge. They gave me an office to interview him for 3 hours. They were so proud. Even some of them follow where the work is showing. So it doesn't happen all the time, but I did notice there was a moment where no calls or emails came in, and I'm like, Tiffany, what happened? Well, word got out, people were talking, maybe someone misspoke, maybe someone misheard, but suddenly the employers were basically giving them a gag order. Don't talk to her or else. And this happened to me in Lordstown with General Motors as well, so much so to the point they threatened to shoot me. I mean, this is serious. What I'm noticing is that corporations are like, well, I'll put it to you this way. Why is it acceptable that we have to give workers gag orders? So it shouldn't be right that someone has to be silenced, that a worker can't talk. Like in my case, I wasn't talking about the employer. I am literally interviewing working Americans, asking them about their family history, their cultural memory, what their labor is like, the pride they have in making the products that they're making at these companies. We're not tearing apart management or attacking CEOs, unless in Dave Green's case, where a CEO and a president personally attacked him on social media. Of course, I'm going to give a counter narrative to say the opposite, because it wasn't fair. And I think that that's the problem. Why should a CEO or a shareholder be able to usurp a narrative in the New York Times or the New Yorker or CNN or MSNBC, hijack a narrative to make it about them? Like, you're not where you are if it isn't for the people. So I think we have a problem here. which is what I'm trying to do at every turn, is rotate this paradigm where we see someone like FDR and Roy Stryker using Dorothea Lange and Gordon Parks to talk about how great their policy is. And then you remove someone like Dorothea Lange and you silence Florence Owens Thompson, and her family makes no royalties from the image. So what I'm trying to do here, Zoe, is put that forth, right? Love and solidarity and unity in action, how that shows up to add value and change people's lives and transforms lives, but also to say, look, America, we need like safe places, like how people with AIDS and HIV needed a safe place to go. American working people need somewhere to go where they can talk about their lives. Like, this is nonsense that an employer feels threatened if a worker talks about their family, their history, their pride, and the product they make. This is insane. And I think this is what is causing us to have so much historical amnesia, such an awful, bitter treatment of working class people. The country doesn't have the wealth that it has if it wasn't for everyday people's labor. So you have to allow an oral history and a safe place to exist. So at the moment, through all that action, I am the safe space. I am the institutional safe space for people to come. And that's often what happens is someone will write me and email me like, I want to talk to you about what's happening in my community or what my family did. Or, you know, a girl came up to me at CMU last week and was just saying, like, the factory that her grandfather, her relative worked in, they dismantled it. It's gone. It's not there. And I said, it is there. Go back to the site and photograph it, right? History is always permeating every single space. I think that we fail because we're so rushed as a culture. When you walk through a town or a space, you might not see it, but it's there. And I enjoy doing that as a photographer, making these invisible realities, these invisible energies and workforces visible because it's there. And if in order for us to deal with history or stop things from repeating itself, you have to bring a visual aid to it and discuss it. It has to become a dialogue that is then internalized in such an empathic way that it energizes people to take action. And that is what I'm always testifying and calling people to do. And I'll continue to work around these ideas of collective solidarity and unity. And actually, the show that was announced March 2nd for MoMA in May 2024, I'm opening up my solo show, which is titled, what is it titled? I think it's LaToya Ruby Frazier, Monuments of Solidarity. So I'm driving it even further home. So MoMA will open up. It's 7 rooms, 10,000 square feet. Those of you who were able to see the Matisse exhibition, I think it's that 3rd floor location. So it's 10,000 square feet where Roxana has brought me in to reimagine all of my bodies of works as monuments. And in this exhibition, I'm putting all of these women of color at the center. That shows how women have always been a part of US labor history. That shows that we've been the ones supplying the mutual aid and care in spite of how we're treated systemically and how invisible we all remain, or how the fact that we're invisible to so many men in patriarchy, it kind of subverts all of that to give us an opportunity to really delve back in from that perspective. Or what is it like to feminize the concept and the way of making steel? So I get to do that with Sandra Goldford in this exhibition, who is a Black woman steel worker that worked for Jones and Laughlin, which was the competitor to Andrew Carnegie's Edgar Thomson Steelworks in the 1970s and 80s. But it is important for me to offer that to my generation and the next generation, and obviously to my colleagues, that we look to things that aren't so much that they're these structural things in the image of man, but that they are ideas of action, right? Action. All of my work should be calling you to action. And in that, Zoe, it brings it full circle. So I'm already, through all the work, helping you to join into this grassroots movement that is really underscored with the most important concept, which to me is love, but agape love, which we know through spiritual and religious understanding. It has to be agape love, right? America functions with like, love is conditional in this country. It's quite conditional. And so I'm trying to say it, an agape love where you really love somebody and you can show up for someone, even if you're a total stranger. Those men didn't know me in Lordstown. In often cases, people have never even seen a Black woman before. That happened in Belgium. They'd never seen a Black African-American woman before. So like I'm showing up for people, they don't know who I am. And we're making work that is impacting people who probably haven't even been born yet. And that's the importance, right? My work is rooted in faith. It's the things unseen and the action that you take in spite of what is the circumstance affecting you in the moment you make it. That is the most important thing that I think artists can give to our society. And the last thing I'll say is the title. It's called More Than Conquerors. More Than Conquerors comes straight from Romans in the Bible. And that scripture, in that scripture, the message is that it's saying like we've been being put to death all day long, right? We've been being put to death all day long, and yet we still remain victorious in him who loved us, which is Christ, especially because it was just Easter. So that's the moral and spiritual lesson of today. But that's also where the title derives its names, because these CHWs are absolutely more than conquerors, and they did something insurmountable that even our own president was too cowardice to do. So I think, again, we deserve to salute them and honor them, and to do it through love and unity.
That was amazing. Thank you so much, Zoe. That was a great question, and LaToya for that incredible answer. Our final question today will be from Bong.
Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you, LaToya. This is like Terry Groves, NPR double overtime. You so. It's just amazing. It's monumental solidarity. It's exactly what the rail is about. Keep it free, mobilize community, various community, not at all thinking to condescend our reader, nor spoon feeding them. And I think that's the commonality that we share deeply, because activism is part of what art can do. Absolutely. So let me ask you this. Because I never read American history until the arrival of Trump presidency. So I went back from the very beginning, reading 75 essay from the Federalist paper, and then the anti-Federalist paper. And then my favorite is Alexis de Tocqueville, Democracy in America, written first volume 1835, second 1840. Took me a month to read it carefully. I'm reading it now again. But one of the things he say, two things he say that seem to be fitting to this discussion, LaToya. One is philanthropist or philanthropy, which means to love people. Something America has that the European or the Asian culture do not depend on philanthropists to support culture because the state take care of it. So it is here that I hope philanthropists should be mindful and have that direct pleasure and support something of all of us do and other action in society. So number two, one of the things that Tocqueville was so impressed by America is the American people willingness to work so hard 6 days a week. 7 days a week, they get together, they create the town hall, they talk about how they can contribute different things that the community needs. So it is that impressed him so much, being a French aristocrat, never seen anything like it. It is that we need to take care anything, any issue concerning our community locally speaking. We do not wait ever for the federal level, local government, federal government come and rescue us. Just no more, no less than a year before when Toro were put in jail for not having paid tax. Of course, there's no federal tax in those days, but there were local tax. So 1846, I think, because 47 is civil disobedience was written. So he didn't pay tax, knowing the tax will gone directly supporting the war against Mexico and also perpetuate furthering institutionalization of slavery. So he put in jail. So the next day, his mentor and friend Emerson came and bailed him out. So when Emerson walked in and saw his young friend behind the prison cell, and he said, "What are you doing in there, David?" The famous response were, "What are you doing out there, Henry?" So there always that urgency. All right, the long question here, sorry, but I'm excited. I had a few privilege meeting Toni Morrison, and one of the things she said that stuck in my mind forever, and it's actually from her Nobel acceptance speech in '93, where she say something profound. She say, from the first sentence of our childhood, that we all remember the phrase, "once upon a time." It's so important. It's not about facts. It's more about narrative, you know? So as we study in art school, we taught this form and content. The two have to coincide. So I remember reading your interview, I think we did in the summer of 2013 when you had the show at Brooklyn Museum. You confessed that the first photo you made was one of your cousin in Holland Avenue in Braddock in Pennsylvania, southwest of Pittsburgh. So it struck you as a portrait of August Sander. And I remember reading that. And then some point through a teacher who gave you or introduced you to the work of our friend Carrie Mae Weems, and then there's also, Larry Clark and Eugene Rich and so on. So my question is that it seems that the narrative, the drive to narrative, is inherent from the very beginning. So my question is simple. What is that continuity meant to you, and where it is now feeling the sense of self-confidence, and you do have a larger voice now to mobilize it? So can you describe that continuity?
Yes, and thank you for all of that. I enjoyed listening to you. I appreciate everything you just shared and for enlightening us with that history. I'll go straight to this. It became crystal clear for me in 2010 and 11, especially because losing the hospital and watching them demolish it was just psychologically and emotionally so wounding and devastating, and grieving my grandmother and her loss in there. It is so important. At that moment, I was studying with Ron Clark at the Whitney ISP. And one of the people who really pulled me under his wing, because he saw exactly what I thought I was seeing through the current mayor's partner with a clothing company and a PR advertisement company, was that they were using my town, exporting it, but to sell the ideology of the creative class theory and these bourgeois values. But yet these are like privileged hipsters. There's, in those ads, they refer to them as urban pioneers of a new frontier. And it's just so insidious, and it masks the real issues at hand. It was also, to talk about these egalitarian types of philosophies in the midst of so much discrimination and abandonment and neglect from the local, state and federal levels. It was so necessary to triple down on the Frankfurt School theorist belief that you can't make these pretty images to just sell devoid of context and meaning. Everyone thinks they can make a photograph, right? We've got these phones that could teach us the rule of thirds. Sure, everyone can take a picture, but do you know how to stand on it as a platform? Do you know how to contextualize it to counter ideologies that are dangerous? Do you know how to stand on it to fight back against propaganda that shapes our minds and convinces us all of these things that are divisive around race, class, gender, sexuality, citizenship? I mean, the list goes on and on. Like the Frankfurt School theorists were absolutely right. I do not think that is a coincidence that I got to study under that type of school of thought and then see someone like a President Trump rise to power. And to see yet that even all of our media outlets, right? Your MSNBC, CNN, all of these folks giving such vitriol and such a racist platform. Every time they talk about them, they miss an opportunity to teach the general public all these other things so that they can make the right decision that could save them and their families and their communities' lives, right? So this is a real war here that's going on ideologically as well as spiritually, right? All these Republicans with all of this financial wealth and no moral compass that are completely devoid of any type of spiritual understanding. Like, this is offensive to humanity and to our environment. It is such an urgent crisis, and I just can't stand on the sidelines. I can't do it. Like I ignore January and February. Like, I'm not interested in speaking for Black History Month because it's Black history every single day I wake up. But it's like, if we're going to talk about King, especially as Democrats, especially as progressive liberal people, quote the speech that got him murdered, right? If you're not quoting the three evils, you're not talking about King. And I think we even have to reform the way we talk about that, because we do it in such a passive way. I think, like, go back to the three evils, quote it all of the time, because that's where he said, he left off exactly where I'm picking up with my work, saying that there would be a moment where we would see these corporations and we would see automation and we would see them sending our jobs overseas, and we would start saying, that's not fair. Right? Like, he said it, right? From King and Toni Morrison, to pick up on what you said. I love her interview with Charlie Rose, because she says to him, and it helped me so much get focused in. She said, like, not to fixate on racism so much because it's going to distract you, right? It's going to keep you doing the thing you should really be doing. And so that's where you see my work, especially as I mature and learn how to speak for myself after the notion of family. You start seeing that in inclusivity and solidarity, where all of my work, you may not like me as the messenger, you may not like what I have to say, but guess what? I'm backed by a choir of people. Like, this is a choir of people, and it gets denser and denser the more I make. This is a choir of people harmonizing together, calling for justice and solidarity and action. And it also becomes the historical record that's an indictment against this era that I just witnessed. Right? For as many breaths as I have left, I'm going to continue to be an artistic insurgent that is witnessing what I believe are crimes against humanity in the 21st century, while people just stood by and did nothing.
LaToya,
we have to make these
behind you. We right behind you, because monumental solidarity is the key. Just no more, no less, when essentially in civil disobedience, as you know, inspires so many amazing people, including Dr. King, Gandhi, and others. Some point he say, every now and then we must rise up to be the counter frictions against the machine. Machine favor coldness, and it favors speed for the tyrant, the demagogue, the dictators. And we have to counter it with slowness of culture, but we have to do it aggressively. That's why the social environments every day, we bring our community together, and just super inspired by this talk. So let's spend some time together. Are you in New York for a while?
I can come to visit. I'll be coming quite a bit, working on the MoMA show, so I will come to New York quite often.
All right, let's come and we're gonna bring our friend together. Maybe Dagun is here, can come too, and Zoe and others. So thank you so much. I'm so inspired. I don't know what to do with myself for the rest of the afternoon, but definitely something very, very soon. Thank you, LaToya.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you, Jess.
Thank you so much, Fong. Thank you so much, Fong. And of course, echoing Fong's thanks and gratitude for the conversation today. And now I'm so excited to move to some poetry to conclude this incredible conversation. We are so honored and lucky to have Madison McCartha here to read poetry to close today's program. Madison is a poet, critic, and multimedia artist. Freakophone World is their debut book of poetry and visual art. Their second book, The Crypto Drone Sequence, is forthcoming from Black Ocean. McCartha holds an MFA from the University of Notre Dame and is a PhD student at UC Santa Cruz. And thank you so much, Madison, for being here.
Thank you, Eleanor, for the introduction, and Carolyn and the rest of the Brooklyn Rail staff for inviting me. It's such a privilege to read and sort of share this space with LaToya Frazier. It's incredible. So I just wanted to say some quick things about the crypto drone sequence because it's sort of a peculiar project. But so I think of the crypto drone sequence as a simulation glitch, a queer assemblage journal with a cut-up persona, and a narco-punk bot tremor using as its source material a technical handbook on computer network security, as well as some chewed-up text from Jean Genet, Edouard Glissant, and others who together constitute this book-length poem. As a critical project, the crypto drone sequence performs and speculates this connection between the racialized technologies, that is drones, data bunkers, internet security software, and back-end laborers who comprise US-based surveillance networks. So in the spirit of making the invisible visible, these pervasive but largely invisible surveillance infrastructures offer this tangible set of materials and vernaculars with which to render the persistent, spectral, occulted, that is hidden, technologically mediated lives of racism. So this is an excerpt from that book. Listen up. From now on, this worm who stole the spotlight speaks, self-replicating code carrying, no dangerous payload, erasing, no witness, chirping in the velvet air until the network strings me back, a gold strap jerked out of a voice far and far, merest hiss in a flower voice, if you loved me, I would have lasted one more day. The president's desire isn't that I kill, but transmute your death into an opaline light. Watching through the mullion, daily life contains within itself the abuse of daily life. Because crypto drone cares, he untethers caring. Behind enemy lines, a cloud pattern spits my cryptopod into a variable terrain. My copperhead glint, shot down like a stray, if I go ballistic. Cryptodrone burns as both an insect and a sound. Barest magnolia spark, I tried feeding, I tried. From the dusk above, tearing away the branches for the shot. Thermonuclear trace I fold to see all winter what felt like years. Cryptodrone perceives and flows a registry of disallowed destinations. Except you don't see me at all, do you? An iodine flitting through the narrow compass of a chamber. Learning to love myself, the first step is breaking out in a parallel word. If Cryptodrone terminates in a forbidden terrain, his body stripped and detained, visa waiver denied, an operator tests my inner oil with a finger, where my destination can be discerned, and every threat injected with a sensitivity label. Eyes only. officers only, detain while attempting to enter only, execute on sight only. Hiding in a gem, a germ, cryptodrone feels but cannot touch. An eye, a lost generates, if I gets inside. A war-wedding eye golds, where cryptodrone begins and ends. If I a bomb enter an emerald, exit you love eliminate to speak. A weird, a vector marches through, the eye, already a country fastens to measure. The many tensions, a police thread, a glamour, surveying from its agate. My initials destroy, enter and seek. If I in the stop keep begin to feel, understand? If an inside extracts a threat, a self, from one arrested listening in, the dark goings go, the try anyway. From an exit light you, unequal is, begins. Crystallize yourself in jewels to survive heuristic detection, filthy as a star under the administrator's bailiwick. A heuristic means a rule or behavior cryptodrone exhibits as scum suddenly accessing a privileged domain, as a frost on the lashes of your eyes. Cross-site scripting can be a delicate exploit. Once a virus starts talking server to server like a peer, instead of scum, unpredictable distortions can arise. Born stateless, cryptodrone has no country of his own, but I'm not going to tell you who he was. Sneaking up to feed, a worm lighting a thread in multiple darks. To unlearn fabricated attacks, provoke the enmity of the state, as a plume who withstood the wave yet wouldn't break. So go ahead and cry. This isn't a hustle. I offer my eyes to the wind, my face and ears a blood the rustle in a field draws. Because the president doesn't like surprises, my iodine maps the strata of privileged domains, a chalk lashing a grid along the gray. Most wired communication systems are considered bound, but when a fever green floods the presidential septum, cryptodrone possesses a fang-like illumination. A gold poetry ripens, I promise, in the equally real globe. When cryptodrone is forbidden from flying below, acicular white, contagion yellow, distinct desires I wanted correspond. To call them, spectrograph a higher world. In rebellion orange, illuminated red, a history of severe in the chevelure palette. Each threat plainly paroled, cross-hatch pink under the hunter state's redword pinch. Getting bit by a cipher means, for cryptodrone, being ready to die for love. A polypropylene orange, percussing over the green. To spoof a return, the deep wood lily holds a cache no administrator can touch. A stone blue pulsing in the semaphore dark. If I, a glimmer, the circuit above returns, while the hypodermic air watches for our demise, how should I act, wagging my finger from the dust? Last one. More than half of US citizens carried a non-soluble burden, would get so worked up, living for others, as a blip a bunker drone cores, stripping a task for you and you alone. There are many false choices pressing into the grid. You can feel the grain of being watched, every choice a rod of light against your back and thigh. It's cozy, staying the path, easy as being crushed, a soft spy recording your touch under the administrator's palette. To slip the binary, flex an error until it gleams, a wedge, delicate as the root pigment, splitting the domain. From this loss, a new cryptodrone can emerge. Jittering tear, wrung from a circlet, the royal green of being my own. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Madison. That was amazing. That was really beautiful and a really amazing way to conclude the conversation today. Again, thank you so much to LaToya and Jess, and also thank you to Demetria, Sarah, Emily, and the rest of the team at Gladstone Gallery for all their support leading up for today. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on our YouTube channel. For the past 22 years, the Rail has been a platform for arts, culture, and politics through a monthly publication and public events like our daily NSE. Please check the chat for a link to donate to support the Rail, and join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Josephine Halverson and Eleanor Hartney on the event of Unforgotten at Sycamore Jenkins & Co. We will conclude tomorrow with a reading by Lisa Rogel. And again, thank you to all of you for being here this afternoon. And we will now turn on the microphones and everyone can say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much again. This has been fantastic.
Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you,
LaToya.
LaToya.
Thank you, Madison, for your reading.
Thank you, LaToya.